doubting me, and I always hit record.
Okay, now,
prompt.
Lindsay.
If we prompt you, isn't it?
Appreciate the response prompt. I appreciate it.
That's the response.
This is a heavy response prompt. You're never going to live this down. So when we recorded, I co-founded the Open Educational Resources Special Interest Group with ABAI, and the first CEU project we did, it was me. I was hosting it. I was doing it through the PsychCore channel and all that stuff, and I had it all set up. And man, I'm a tech guru and all this stuff, and I could have sworn I hit the record button, and I didn't.
Oh,
and we promised everybody that we were going to have it available as a CEU for later, and so we actually had to all of us get back together and re-record a lecture, pretending that there were people present and asking questions. It was embarrassing. So Patrick, I feel you, and I will respond. That was fun. Yep, exactly. It's teamwork.
Teamwork makes a dream work.
Damn right. We got Christine, Marion, Samantha, Needy, Teresa, Ari, Lee, Shruti, Amanda Alvarez, one word, Lindsay, myself. Brad is here. All right, I sent him a link a minute ago.
Okay.
Oh, look at this.
What's happening?
Not much. We haven't done anything. We're just BSing about how we all make mistakes and require response prompting from time to time.
We're all doing what?
Commenting about how we make mistakes and we require response prompting. And
oh, I could zoom in on that one. Shit.
Are you driving?
Time. Oh, absolutely.
Like a good BCBA working your bacon off.
That's pretty much it. Welcome to In-Home, folks.
And that's no joke. Like, I think that's one of the things that isn't communicated enough about our field. That once you get into that role, your life it's heavy, and you have to set some crystal clear boundaries in order to have a life outside of being a BCBA. It's brutal, and I've watched Brad kind of do this through it, because him and I have been working together for forever now, and it's been sad to watch some of it. Like I watched Brad go from I'm happy-go-lucky and life is great to I'm a BCBA and life is freaking awesome to oh my gosh, my life sucks. And then I watched him put in these rules in his life, and he kind of established some boundaries, and then suddenly Brad came back to Brad. It was great. But yeah, it's and I watch it in my other job too. A lot of people, the burnout thing is a real thing.
Yeah.
Set your boundaries. So.
I think one of the trickiest things about being aware of burnout is the match of I need to get all this done because of the ethics behind everyone else. Have fun balancing yourself with the ethics of what you're supposed to provide. It's not as easy as it sounds. Saying no means someone doesn't get supervised. Saying no means, that kid might have a delay in learning the alphabet.
Yeah. And that's okay. Because you'll be able to help them learn the alphabet rather than not being there. So.
Well, they stopped throwing the alphabet at me afterwards, so, we actually did better.
As anyway. We had, welcome to PsychCore meetings, folks. We digress all the time. So, anyway.
All the time, yeah.
All the time. That's why we reinforce ourselves.
Circus of squirrels, Ryan. You know it is.
All right. Speaking of circus of squirrels, Patrick asked a very relevant question a week ago, and I ignored him. So we shall use his question, which was really a question that was pointed towards methodology questions and science. And we're going to spin it into philosophy. So he was asking a question, probably jokingly, but I didn't take it that way, about a train leaving Chicago and a train leaving Los Angeles. And it's the classic, the classic math problem, from our childhood. If you didn't experience that, you're lucky. If you did, then I'm sorry. And it probably still hangs with you like it clearly does with Patrick and I. So anyway, the train leaving Los Angeles and the train leaving Chicago. Figuratively, the idea is where do they meet? But I guess what this spins to is, this is a rational versus an empirical question, right? So the empirical answer is they meet where they flip and meet. And the behavior analyst will say, we'll wait and see, right? So the behavior analyst is going to say, I don't know where they meet. I can mathematically predict if one's traveling at 55 miles an hour, one's traveling at 70, and I know the lengths of tracks, and I know all the switches that they need to do, because there isn't a straight shot between those two, I promise you. So you're going to have to take the Empire Builder out of Chicago, and you're going to have to head west, which eventually, about the time you get to Billings, you're going to have to head south. Anyway, different issue. So the point is that you can do all the math in the world to figure out where those two trains are going to meet, and you're going to pass your SAT or whatever class it is that you're trying to take. But you're not going to have an answer that's real. You're going to have an answer that's rational. And that's one of the things that I love about our science, is that we're rational people. We're intelligent. We make logical decisions. That's the rational piece, right? So you make logical decisions and predictions and things like that. But the empiricism wins out.
At a higher rate than I used to.
That's good. But empiricism will win out. The trains may have been predicted to meet in, say, Des Moines, Iowa, but if they don't, that's okay, because empirically they meet where they meet. And we're going to work with that so if they meet, say, in, I don't know, Las Vegas, that means something happened rain on the way from LA, because it only went a few hours. So something drastic happened. And behavior analysts are wonderful. I mean, that they're smart. They take a lot of it and they predict it, right? So those predictions don't predict wrong. We're going to go with it. We're going to follow the data. It's going to be all FBA and FB little a. So FB little a to me is assessment. FB big A, right? So it'll be all caps, FBA, all caps, or FBA, all case. Everybody teaches little. It is, but it gives you empirical insight with that experience. In the real world, it's not going to happen to do it to the level of an analysis. So you're going to be little a, so functional assessment. And give you a decent amount that is going to allow you to some conclusions about behavior, right? So you're going to make a rational guess hypothesis based on the evidence. But ultimately, if you predicted that the behavior is maintained by attention, is really maintained by, then you're going to follow the escape path. You're not going to keep beating your head against the wall and go, no, it's got to be attention. And it's humble. It's another way of saying we're humble. And we're humble, as all our pompous pricks. And saying that with as much love as we understand, we come across very pompously. But ironically, we're one of the most humble fields I've ever come across in terms of psychology, because we're willing to be wrong, so heavily.
So
can we say that's induction? What's that?
I noticed that the whole scientific part and the empirical part, the whole, your 7 dimensions, because everybody has a grocery list of strategies and ideas in the school world, and we're just going to give them what's the reinforcer, and let's get a token board and penny board, and and like dinosaurs. Okay, get some dinosaur tokens, and then our problems are solved. And we had this grocery list of ideas, and they're not conceptually systematic, and we didn't analyze them, and we didn't do all that. And my supervisor, my BCBA supervisor, and we've been having this talk for the last couple of days of, what's better, to have a list of strategies and ideas and just cross your fingers and hope they work, or actually do our, assessments and our big FB little a and FB little, big A, and really trying to find the why versus all these little hows. And it makes a big difference when you know the why versus all these different hows, structural versus functional.
Yeah, totally. And you put the two together and you got a dream world, right? And I think Brad's amazing at this. Brad is really good at bridging that school gap into the behavioral world, because it's not always easy to bridge. And a lot of times behavior analysts are shunned in that particular setting, largely because we torque people off. But when you put both of those together, when you have a laundry list of items of things that you can do based on function, then wow, now you're talking power. And then you can have the teachers come up with that. You can say, hey, I did this work and I think that this is maintained by attention. I understand you might not think that, but let's just work down that path. So what can we do if it was? And then boom, now all the teachers have these ideas, and it's their ideas. And you go, okay, sounds good. Let's just collect a little data and see how it works. And then so you're collaborating and cooperating. I tend not to come across as collaborative and cooperative with other fields, but in reality, if you don't, then you're not going to be effective. So anyway, we're so far off track already.
I was like, wow, we can keep going, but
Everybody's like, oh no, and I want to get into this field. Why? So
Yeah.
anyway.
It sounds great. No, it's pretty awesome.
So yes, be humble, and another word for humble in my world is empirical. So so let's see. The only prompt that I got, was that a sufficient answer, Patrick? Does that work?
Yeah. Oh,
Empirical. All right. Covered my bacon. I thought about that for a week. I was like, how can we answer this professionally?
That's pretty deep thought for a question I was trying to mess with you with. So that's pretty deep.
Trust me, if there's anything I can do, it's complicated. So, which is irony for a behavior analyst. Right? Yes. If you didn't hear that, Brad said, I'm the director of parsimony, which is true. He is, not me. All right. So the only other response prompt we got, and I can't remember who posted it in the group. Lindsay, was it you? Was it the induction question? Was that you?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I understand it. I guess I just
Sure.
use the wording for it. Like I heard a couple questions and the question was like, is this deduced and induced? And I was like, what does this mean? So
Sure.
I'm good now.
Yeah, it's one of those things that once it clicks, it's clicked. This is probably one of the core differences between our field and the rest of psychology. Most of psychology uses what we call a hypothetico-deductive method. So you start out with a theory, and we can pick Freud for fun, right? Because everybody knows that Freud was full of hooey, right? So we're not going to pick on somebody that's more sensitive. So we'll pick on Freud, right? So Freud was full of hooey. So he has this theory about what's going on, and then you make hypotheses based on what you would predict, you would observe, right? And then you use the results of those experiments to say, yes, this supports the theory, or no, it doesn't. Inductive goes the other direction and says, oh, hell no, I don't care about theory, whatever. Let's just see what can we build. And I used to describe it as tinker toys. Like, you can give me a Lego box that has a picture on it of what you're supposed to make. And then, so that's kind of a deductive method, right? So make this and follow the instructions, and if you do it right, it'll come out. Or you can do the inductive approach, and you just build whatever you want. Like, wow, here's 5,000 pieces. I could build the Eiffel Tower. It might not look great, but I'll build it. So you can go one direction or the other. Ideally, they kind of meet in the middle, but the inductive approach, to me, is a valuable approach to a young science. And that psychology is a horrifically young science, and behavior analysis is even younger. So we're in a very inductive phase where we're still trying to figure out the basic principles of behavior. We don't even agree on the basic principles of behavior. We're still not set on CMOs. It's not there. We're still trying to balance out, is it a 3-term contingency or is it a 4? We don't have complex theory yet. We're still working the basics. But humans being humans are drastically impatient species that we are. And we, as psychologists, want to compare ourselves to things like physics that's been around for, I don't know, since the beginning of time. Like, you know what I mean? In terms of a formal science, it's like over 1,000 years old. Like, it's crazy. Like, you can't compare yourself to that. So we try and we borrow methodology from physics as a psychology as a whole, going this hypothetical deductive route. But it's like taking shots in the dark. Like, anybody could come up with a hypothesis, and then we if you want to spin back around and we talk about like Karl Popper in the early 1900s talking about falsification, right? So the idea being that science isn't about proving yourself right. That's a confirmation bias, and we get that all the time. It's really about proving things wrong. So you make a hypothesis based on the theory, right? So you take a theory of hypothetical deductive. You take a theory, you create a hypothesis, you test the hypothesis, and you really are testing against the null. Like, can you prove it wrong? And if you can't prove it wrong, then that gives you some confidence in your hypothesis and gives you some confidence in your theory. But even what we found is that scientists don't even do that. They're so biased as humans. All of us are so biased that if we don't take this blatantly neutral approach from the get-go, we're going to find evidence of what we want to find evidence for. Right, Lindsay, you spotted, I'm looking at your chat. Yes, exactly. That's why we have philosophic doubt all the time. That's exactly why, because we are so biased at every level that if you don't doubt things and you don't remind yourself that you could be wrong at every phase, then you will draw conclusions that are incorrect simply because of confirmation bias, which is finding what you want to find. For my favorite example of confirmation bias, for those of you that are like, what the heck is that? I remember it, but I don't recall the details. The memes, right? The meme with the dude from the History Channel's got the crazy hair. He's like, it's aliens, right? That dude is confirmation bias all day long, because as long as something isn't explained, he can say it's alien.
Yeah.
That's why he's looking for evidence of something. And he's like, I don't understand how the pyramids were built because I don't understand a little bit about water and construction, but I'll call it aliens, right? And everybody says, well, you can't figure out how the pyramids are too flat. You could do that with today's technology. Yes, you can. You can take a rock and put a groove in something and drop some water in it, and once that water levels out in the middle, guess what? It's flat. It's called it's an old school thing, like thousands of years old. So yeah, you can do this stuff, and if you don't know the details, then you fill in those gaps with what you want to fill in those gaps with, and that's confirmation bias. And so we do that in psychology, and psychology is awful at it, in my opinion. And I was trained as an experimental psychologist, which means that my training is kind of across the board. Now, I took a behavior analytic track in my training, but I'm trained to do group research. I'm trained to do, so social psych was an area that I was interested in. I studied that, looked a lot at that. Statistics, stuff that we as behavior analysts kind of, I did a lot of that stuff and figured out what the problems are with it. And philosophically, I align much more with the inductive method, which is just, let's observe for 100 years, maybe 200. Screw it. Let's observe for 200 years before we start forming theories. Like, you want to form a theory, great. And then replicate it in another 150 years. Like, science is not an endeavor that you're going to see solved within your lifetime. So it's slow, and you have to be patient. And with the work that we're doing today, hopefully we'll influence those down the road. And like the old saying about, if I've seen further, it's only because I stood on the shoulders of giants. It's not one particular scientist isn't better than another. They just have a different perspective that they're looking at the world from. So from my perspective, what I see is that we're still really young, and we got to build, which is, and we're kind of separating out that piece here that says the practitioner piece versus doing the research piece. And the philosophy side is really rooted in the research piece, which got us to the practitioner stuff, right? How did we get the evidence and the data that we got in order to get here to be able to treat behavior the way we treat it today? So Lindsay, I'm reading your same question. The Lego example, you said follow directions and make this. I may be thinking too much into this, but I immediately think of task analysis. The example, cheesy one with the Lego thing, what I was saying is on the picture, theoretically, you're going to be able to make what's in the picture, right? So, but you're right. The instructions are a task analysis, so you're going to build up from there. So that's fine. I was trying to be a little bit more abstract. It's like, yeah, you can build what's in the picture based on what's in the box. And that's kind of a deductive approach. Can we build that out of it? And an inductive approach is, what are we going to build? Just drop a bunch of Legos on the table. And I still have my Legos from when I was a kid. I was a Lego freak, and my kids have them now, and they don't really play with them much, but once in a while they get them out. And it's just a bunch of fishing tackle boxes. Like, that's tackle boxes. That's all it is. It's full of Legos. Build what you want. Like, be inducted. Just build. Have fun. So, and that's the way I see our science. That got me into trouble in my dissertation because I argued vehemently against having any theory. So my advisor and I found the middle ground, which was the trans-theoretical model of behavior change. So we had to look at some theory in context of the behavior that I was measuring. So we looked at the trans-theoretical model, and there's problems with that. So we played around with it. What theory, what predictions did it make? And we part of it was cool, part of it wasn't. And I largely said, no, middle finger to trans-theoretical model by the time I was done. Yeah, free operant examples are inductive examples. Really, you're thinking about how do you get to the idea of what your next experiment is, right? So when you're thinking inductively, you're going, Sidman did this. Sidman said, I'm going to track these rats and I'm setting them up on this schedule of reinforcement. Now I'm going to change the schedule of reinforcement. That's an inductive question. What happens if, right? So I'm going to make a change, and what happens if? Then he put those 12 experiments together and he came up with something else. Then he put 47 experiments together and he goes, oh, well, something else, right? And he tested those things and kept building on the existing studies and research that he did. And eventually we went, I wonder if we could test this with humans. And the answer was, yes, you can. It all applies. In fact, almost all the procedures used today were discovered on rats first, or pigeons, or dogs, fish, worms, all that stuff. It's one of the things that I love about our field is that it really connects nature together. So, makes it amazing to me. So yeah, so free operating examples, sure, they're induced examples. Because and this leads to a great, I'm going to digress just a little bit, but it leads to a great issue in our field. You're going to constantly hear that you have to be research-based. Every decision you make has to be based on research. That does not mean that you have to copy somebody's study. If you want to strengthen a behavior, you know what to do. The research says reinforce it. Doesn't matter what the behavior is. If the behavior is nose picking and you want to increase it for whatever reason, you know to reinforce it. You don't need a study that says, how do you increase nose picking? Like, who cares? Use the inductive approach. You have the evidence you have.
There's not enough articles out there for all the behaviors anyway.
Right, it's impossible.
It's the reason we have the principles we do.
Yeah, and Brad and I laugh at this all the time, like behind the scenes. We go, oh my gosh. Come on,
my
people.
first 6 months at the PCBA, holy crap! Like, no one's ever seen this before. Like, what do we do? And he's like, reinforce it, man. I'm like, oh, all right.
Well, I need something that's evidence-based. I'm like, are you telling me that reinforcement isn't evidence-based? Like, that's like the core of the whole thing, boss. And we jest and we joke, but it is seriously an issue. You'll get it pounded into your heads during your programs. You probably already have. You got to have evidence, got to have an article, got to have a reference, got to have this, got to have this. Okay, Skinner 1938 still counts, folks. Like Skinner 53 still counts. Seligman 72 or whatever it is still counts. Like all of these things. Like when I teach this class this fall, the first thing I'm having people do is read an article from 1975, and then we're backing it up to 68. Just to teach that the relevance of the science is not based on the date. It's based on what the article and what the study showed you. So yes, there's some wonderful new research out there. Amazing. But that doesn't necessarily mean that what was done in 78 is bad, you know? So it just means that if you got some new stuff, add it to the old stuff and mix and match. So the longer we go in our science, the more you have to read, sadly. Every time somebody says that, all I can do is sing, can I get it? All right, so that's a little bit about the inductive, deductive. It's enough to fight at a good conference. Like you can really stuff about which one's better and which one's worse. I will obviously fight on the side of the inductive researchers all day long. The apple falling from the tree, the old Newton example, that's an inductive thing. Oh, I wonder if, you know, it hit him in the head. It wasn't, I deduced this based on this, you know. And every time somebody, you know, I make the joke about it, armpits, assholes, and theories and all that stuff. And theories are like armpits. Everybody's got two and they stink. It's just that I'm not a big theory guy. Other people will take you in other directions. So that's my bias. Like, well, you have to have direct science.
I want to stand on this side of the table and be like, oh yeah, well we didn't get the Oedipus complex, so you know.
Right. I was in a tenure meeting. I was 5 years towards my tenure at Eastern Washington University, and I wasn't getting a lot published. Like nothing was happening. It was like the science is just crap. I was getting garbage data. I was doing research, more research than most faculty. I'd probably done 24 studies. Every one of them I presented at conferences. They're great studies, but they're failures. So I was having a hell of a time getting them published. So the guy sitting across from me, who's a very well-known psychologist, is not an inductive researcher, and he thought he was being nice and pompous, and he decides to hold up a piece of paper, and he goes, it's about the, he wrote 5 letters on it. He goes, right theory. And he hands it up to me, and he goes, it's about the theory. And I went off. I was like, it is not about the theory, and that's a bunch of bullshit. And my point was, is that if the science isn't good, that's not going to give you a good theory. So you got to start with this quality data to get to something tangible and have a good theory to base it off of. Starting with a crap theory and trying to guess out of it, to me, it's like, what are you doing? You're paying yourself money and convincing others that you're a scientist? I'm sorry, I get biased. But so that inductive deductive approach is a hot one for me. And it should be. It's as an inductive researcher. So, but a lot of people work the other direction, and they've done some amazing stuff. I'm not saying it's bad to go the other direction necessarily, but you have to be aware of its limitations, and you have to be willing to throw it out. I mean, that was Popper's point, was that if you do a critical test of your theory, right? Karl Popper, the falsification, the guy that really changed science, he argued for a critical test, that every theory has one critical test that can prove it wrong. And if it does, you've got to throw out the theory, but humans don't do that. We don't throw out our theories. We just change them a little bit. There was a theory of perception. I believe it was perception. No, not perception. Attribution. So attributing behavior to certain things. It started out one way, and so many experiments came out of it that it changed it, and the person kept revising the theory. They revised it so much that the predictions based on the revisions 20 years later were contradictory to the predictions that the theory started out with. So that's good in a scientific perspective, but that shows the problem with the hypothetical deductive method, that it can just change and change and change and change. Eventually your theory contradicts its own theory. Like, what's the point? But I always think of that as a positive, going, hey, at least science learned, and the person moved on, they made changes. So that's a good and a bad same time, but I try to present that as an example of how it's, if you don't want to make those changes, it's bad. So, evolve, yes, Ruthie, that's correct. So. All right, what other questions? A lot of people usually get stuck on the teleological behaviorism, methodological behaviorism, regular behaviorism, radical behaviorism. Anybody got questions in those areas? Because that's really what, really on the test you get hit with methodological and radical.
Radical is everything, including private thoughts, private events.
That's what makes it radical.
Right. He had this crazy idea. And then methodological would be they know it. Well, the modern ones, they know it exists, but they don't deduct any reasoning out of private events. We're aware of it, but we're going to base everything off of what we've seen.
Observable. Yeah, Watson's your classic methodological behaviorist. Like, thoughts, feelings. Thank you, sir. Thank you, good sir. Right. Yeah, Watson. All right. So, yeah, Watson was the classic guy, right? He was the one that said, give me 10 infants. And, he did the Behaviorist Manifesto. So he's the one that said, really put the screws to the world, saying that, no, it's the environment that does a lot of this work, folks. And his methodology, his behavioral methodology, or methodological behaviorism, if you will, was only observables. He was rigid in terms of his interpretation of what counts as scientific evidence. Through what's his name, blank slate guy, John Locke. So through and through, he was drastically influenced by John Locke, heavily so, and Mach as well, very much so with Mach, who rejected the idea of hypothetical proposals of things. So he was, super sharp guy, totally inappropriate with his graduate student, but super awesome. And he came up with some really good data and some cool experiments, right? So he did some cool stuff. Skinner came along and made it radical, meaning different, not radical as in radical, dude, like just different. It's radical, not the same. It's different than behaviorism, because he went, of course you can observe your own feelings and thoughts. It's just that no one else can. It's just you. So it's an audience of one. So I can tell you what I'm thinking, but nobody in the room will believe me, and you shouldn't.
You are full of shit.
You have no reason.
Sorry, I was waiting for that since you started talking.
I know
about
you
it.
were. I know. So you just can't believe. So and then Bayer, of course, comes along, and the IOA stuff that we talked about last week, the inter-observer agreement, is about believability, and that's what it is. If you get two people that see the same thing at the same time, your data is believable. If you get one person saying it happened, it's not as believable. So, and so Skinner was really he was way out there from a behavioral perspective, way out there, saying that the thoughts count, and their behaviors and their actions that need to be explained in their own right, and that feelings count, and they're things that are relevant and need to be addressed and worked with. But he was not known for that. People to this day will confuse the basic idea of what Skinner talked about with the private events, basically with Watson's stuff. They just don't put the two together, or they don't separate the two. They see Skinner as the evil, thoughtless human that turned us all into robots. And that's still today. Like, you will still see that alive and well today. Like, you will see it in our own field. if you pay close enough attention, that people don't even remember that Skinner was actually a humanist. He was really worried about the human condition more than anything. And he had a very good vision of how to start teasing stuff apart. And that's Science and Human Behavior. If you haven't read the book, read it. It's great. It'll mean more to you post BCBA than it will pre. I promise you that. So that's one of those things. Hypothetical constructs and explanatory fictions are two big concepts, right? And the circular reason comes off of explanatory fiction. Replication equals believability. You bet. So Lindsay, great prompts. Yeah, hypothetical constructs, anytime you create something hypothetically. So construct is about something physical, right? So this card, it's physical. It's really here. So if it's a hypothetical physical, a hypothetical construct, it's not really there. The classic three are id, ego, superego. You start to get a little sensitive when you use things like the word mind. That's a hypothetical construct. You know, there's not a spot up here where mind exists. Skinner's last student, Dr. Frances McSweeney, who was one of my advisors at WSU, she talked about mind as mind is what brain does. So your brain fires and has all this electrochemical stuff going on, and that produces an experience that we describe as consciousness and we call mind. But mind in itself is not a thing. It's not physical. You can't touch it. It's a hypothetical construct. So therefore, it can't in turn cause something. That's the logic of a behavior analyst. That can torque a lot of people off. You can really, really, really upset people with that line of thinking. So it's not a line of thinking that we like to talk about. So when I talk about hypothetical constructs, we always start off with the initial id, ego, superego, because those are easy. Everybody can hammer on those. When you start hammering on mind, it's a whole different story. When you start hammering on soul, it's a whole different story. Those are hypothetical constructs. It's not physical, empirical evidence to say they exist. It's not to say they don't, say that we don't have evidence right now, which is a very Machian sort of approach, a philosophical approach. So from Ernst Mach. So we don't have that evidence right now. We can't make those claims. So in turn, the hypotheticals can't be an explanation for something. So when people talk about mentalism, and I got into a little bit of a tiff about this the other day somewhere. I was actually on Reddit, which is not a place to get in a tiff on, but it was fun. Anyway, somebody was trying to misapply what mentalism is. And mentalism is simply using a hypothetical construct to explain your behavior, using mind to explain your behavior. So in our world, we call that dualism, right? Mind and body. Thank you, Rene Descartes. We appreciate your 500-year career. We love you. So anyway, so Rene Descartes gave us that idea of mind and body, and it stuck in Western culture. It didn't stick as much in Eastern cultures, right? So this is a cultural interpretation of how the body works. It's very, very influenced, not by science, but by straight up philosophy and some other things. And religion ties into it as well. So this mind-body distinction that Cartesian dualism, what Rene Descartes put out there for us with, the thinking man, the I think, therefore I am, right? So the mind-body stuff, right? So that came about. Behavior analysts says, well, we can't go into the mind part. We can only focus on environmental events because this is not scientific. We can't study it. We can't observe it. So this is a hypothetical for us. So we're only going to work in this realm, which makes us monists as philosophers. So it's all physical, and that it's not that consciousness doesn't happen. That's just the byproduct of your biochemistry and how your body works and the biology. So it's awesome. There's nothing wrong with it. That's just how it works. But we can't then use mind to explain your behavior. We got to look into the real world. We got to look into physical events, and that's what got us to be so effective. Was the focus on environmental influences, tangible things that we can do to change behavior for the better. And sometimes people misapply that and they change behavior for the worse, and they're evil, right? If you will, another hypothetical. But people act in evil ways. That's, I guess, a way to say it. And sometimes we got a bad rap for it, and well-deserved, mind you. We did some really nasty stuff throughout history. Conversion therapy is not cool in any way, shape, or form, but you can definitely get people to change what they say. So anyway, all of these stuff interrelate. So it can be hard to hold these positions. Somebody else talked about, that reminds me of what, hold on. Is Brad driving a Prius?
No, it's a
He is
Toyota
not.
Camry. Thank you.
It's close.
Yeah, it's close. It's actually, this is further than the last car.
That's true. Hypothetical construct. So hypothetical believability, circular reasoning. Oh, back to circular reasoning. So the circular reasoning stuff is, I like to use the Bible as an example, not in a negative way, but as an example. So why did you do it that way? Well, the Bible told me to do. Why do you know that the Bible is right? Because it was written by so-and-so. Why do you know that that it was written by so-and-so? Well, because the Bible said it was. Bible said it was written by God. Well, how do you know that? Well, because the Bible did. Well, how do you know that? And just becomes a circular argument, right? It's not that it's wrong. It's just circular. It has no value for science. It has no value for philosophical explanation. There is a wonderful, wonderful website out there, and I'll share it with the group once I dig it up. I don't remember it off the top of my head, that talks about the different failures of logical reasoning. And if you learn those, it's a very helpful thing. And Brad and I have a plan to turn them into PsychCore videos, but they're really good primer on all the different logical failures. And as behavior analysts, one of the reasons we're pompous is we're taught a lot of those things. You're taught not to think, don't make that logical mistake. And other people make all sorts of logical mistakes, circular arguments, straw man arguments, gaslighting arguments, all sorts of things that are problematic out there that we tend to shun as a science as a whole. And that's what makes us effective, is this very rigid interpretation of the world and the focus on only things that we can measure and deal with. So we don't make those circular arguments. Multiple probe designs. Oh my gosh, that's tough. Amen. You need proof. Multiple probe. Well, maybe if we've got time, we'll come back to multiple probe. I know we talked about designs last week. If we can get out of the philosophy realm, we'll jump into that. It's lots of probes, and they're not aliens.
They're so entertained, they want to go back to measurement.
I know. It's like, oh wow, ouch, that's harsh. Like, man, slap me in it. That's a punisher if I've ever heard one. About private events, do you think if we have enough resources with the help of technology, private events will have a future? Maybe 100%. So who asked that, Shruti? I believe you are spot on. I believe that fMRI is really cool. fMRI is a way to visualize brain patterns that are happening while we self-report private events. I am not, I would not be surprised one bit if somebody like an Elon Musk figures out how to take brain patterns and turn them into a visual.
There's some therapies kind of based on that idea. What is it, Greenleaf in town?
Yeah.
They do some brain mapping stuff, and they have a compile of the brain waves, and they put it all together and start running drills essentially to get brain waves to start channeling. It's fascinating. I don't know any more than how effective it is.
That's a form of biofeedback.
Yeah,
that's what's really cool. Biofeedback isn't behavioral. Right. There's a question of whether or not and the experiments are still out there. We're going to find out. So I think in 50 years, you're going to see a lot of those technologies. The problem is that when you start looking at fMRI, it's not explanatory. It's correlational, right? It's a different level of analysis. So Skinner talked about levels of analysis, right? So you've got, as you go down, those levels don't explain things. The level above them, they stay at their own level. So if you look at behavior, it stays here, right? And then, but if you go, well, biology caused behavior, well, you still have to answer the question of what caused the biological change. This is the common one that you see all the time. You'll see it in the school districts. He's got ADD because his brain chemistry is off. Okay, well, guess what? What caused the brain chemistry to be off? You have to, it's a different level of analysis. It's a fair question, and they're related. I guarantee they're related. The question is, which one came first? Did the behavior change cause the brain change, or did the brain change cause the behavior change? Or did something cause both? And that something might be the same event. Maybe it was a traumatic event that happened, which caused a brain change, which is tied in with the behavior change, and it all links up. It's a different level of analysis. One doesn't explain the other. They describe the same events from a different perspective. And you can always go smaller, mind you, all right? Because eventually we're going to get to pure biology. We're going to look at cellular biology. And then eventually we're going to get down into chemistry. And then we're going to get down into physics below that. And then the mathematicians out there go, wait, you'll get to me eventually. I'll be here. Right. So as you keep going down, you just get smaller levels of analysis. Skinner argued that stay with behavior. Don't go inside the organism to explain it. Stick here. And private events happen to be inside the organism, observable by the organism itself. So when we have a way to measure that, awesome. But we have to be cautious with our explanations, that doesn't try to explain it by just getting smaller, because you still have to explain that thing. So the fMRI, what explained the brain pattern changes? We're not sure. because they match up closely with behavior patterns. So it's just correlational at this point, but they're cool. And I think that that's where I'm hopeful that science progresses, because science, that's what it does always, is progress. So this brain interface stuff between that Elon's doing with the pigs and the humans right now, or pigs and computers, that's awesome. Like, hello, like I totally buy into all that stuff. Like, I think that you're going to get there someday. I hope so. Yeah, science has got to get ahead. It better go further than where it is when I die, please. So.
Please.
Mentalism equals psychology. So Amanda Alvarez, mostly, I believe the answer is yes. Most psychologists are mentalists. They believe in a separation between mind and body, and that what goes on in your mind can cause changes physically. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, what you think and causes behavior changes. Is it wrong? Not necessarily. It's just a different level of analysis. So I don't buy into the mind part. It doesn't add any explanation. It's just, it makes it less parsimonious. But again, some people just can't swallow that pill, and that's okay. You know, when I worked in Eastern Africa, like all over the seaboard, and I would present behavior analysis over there, and everybody's like, no pushback at all. Like, culturally, it's just so different in different parts of the world. Some people push back hard on a mentalism approach, and some people don't. And in Eastern Africa, they were just like, yeah, like,
Well,
get
duh.
it.
Yeah.
You're like, it took you how many years in school to figure that out? Aren't you an idiot? Like, literally, that was the comments that I would get. Like, wow, this is all cultural. And like, which just made me crack up, because then I think back to Skinner's cultural level of selection and going, oh, there's all sorts of weird issues here. So then that's when I got really mad at Descartes. You failed me. Anyway, not completely though. I'm a counseling psychologist. Yep. So I agree. Should be. Is Brad driving a Prius? No, sorry. So I think Patrick, clinical psychologist, favors mentalism. Yeah, historically it has. That's just the way it is. It doesn't mean and that's painting a really big brush. There's a lot of psychologists out there that you're painting a big brush with. And I wouldn't say all of them are hardcore mentalists. It just depends. And a lot of, I had a therapist for a long time. She was CBT, and man, we used to argue. But she had great advice. So she would just like, take this how you will, Ryan. Here's what I suggest. And I would behavioralize it for her, and she would laugh at me and call me Skinner, and then the session would be over, and I'd pay her $125, and she got rich, I got poor, I got better, she got something, and then I fired her. No, and we're still friends. So I may be harsh when it comes to this setting, but practically speaking, in the real world, most of this is irrelevant. But in terms of the test, it is highly relevant. You need to know what they mean. And as behavior analysts in this context, at a conference or something like that, I'm not going to slip into the mentalism stuff at all. And I will give mentalists a hard time. So, but multiple probe design. You're right. We probably didn't, Shruti. Multiple probes. Sorry, I'm scrolling through Brad driving. We get back to that one. Stop picking on it, Patrick. So I've covered multiple probe. I need that broken down. Yeah. Hold on. Let's see. Yeah, I'd be interested in that. Thanks. I'm sure we get right. Y'all are funny. To be fair, I didn't join last week. That's okay. I love philosophical discussion. Circular reasoning, methodological behaviorism versus mentalism. Key difference. So methodological behaviorism versus mentalism is an even bigger difference than radical behaviorism versus mentalism. Methodological behaviorism, absolutely zero zilch. If you can't observe it, if somebody else can't observe it, it's pointless. So Watson, no thoughts, no feelings. You have them, obviously, but Watson as a methodological behaviorist would say that you can't study them scientifically. Skinner says, oh, you can study them, just don't believe a damn thing that anybody says. Which is not far from the two aren't far from each other. But Skinner is saying that each person can observe their own events, which is true. And maybe someday you can get somebody else to observe them too. So. Which part? The difference between methodological and mentalism, Lindsay? You can give me a thumbs up or a nod. That works. All right. So yeah. So methodological, again, only the overt events, no covert events. So drastically different than mentalism. Radical has the same sort of difference. That there's that mind is a hypothetical construct, so it can't cause anything. But Watson was even more strict. saying that I can't even observe thoughts, because from his perspective, you needed an outside observer, not a private observer. So he wouldn't accept any self-report data at all.
Brian, you said
Pointless.
no. You said no something. No observation or.
No private events for Watson. If you can't observe it, it has zero scientific value.
Okay, there it is. Can't observe.
So,
Super strict.
But
it's rigid.
Mentalism, right? You can't observe that either.
Pardon? What's that?
So is mentalism. You can't observe that either.
But a mentalist will tell you that they can.
By what you say?
By what you say. Yes, exactly. So a mentalist will say, mind caused me. I made up. So here's the mentalism component is I'm going to write it in the chat so you guys can have it. This is super easy. So I know that you're going to get, I think you're still getting tested on the 3-term contingency. So SD, my gosh, SD, R, SR. All right, so there's the 3-term contingency. The 4-term, we would add the motivating in there, but we're not going to worry about that right now. Here's the only difference between a mentalist and a behavior analyst. SR, O, R, SR. SR, O, R, SR. So the organism makes a decision. That's it.
So
That's
SOR.
only different.
SOR.
Sorry, I did it again. SD as discriminative stimulus. O, R, SR. There you go.
There you go.
No,
Sorry.
because I saw this on the Behavior Development Solution BDS modules, SOR model, and I was like, what is that? Like, I've never seen that.
Yeah, SORS model that's mentalism. So
Okay.
the only difference between a radical behaviorist, and we'll leave it at radical behaviorist because you can just extrapolate from there. So a radical behavior approach and a mentalist approach is the O.
Yeah.
Now the O is mind, the organism decides. The only reason that we reject it is because you can't observe it, number one. And number two, it doesn't add any explanatory power. I can take the O out and get the same results with every experiment. And this is why it's important to have non-human studies. Because if I can get the same results with a rat that I can with a human and a pigeon and a dog and a fish and a worm and all these things, where is the O for the rat? Where's the O for the pigeon? You don't need it. You get the same behavior. You can explain the same amount of stuff through the environmental contingencies, the environmental scenarios, right? So you don't need it. Parsimony says drop it. The only reason we hang on to it that I can detect is that it is uncomfortable based on our traditional everyday life to go without the decision, the power to make decisions, free will. The moment you drop the O, you drop the idea of free will. The moment you drop mind, you drop the idea of free will. And that is so baked in that to drop that is really, really hard. And it's not a comforting thought. This isn't a bedtime story where you go home and you're like, behavior analysis is so nice. No, it's a really freaking harsh interpretation of what's out there in terms of behavior. And it's not a pretty thing. To me, it's amazing. And it makes the world organized for me, and it makes nature come together. It's awesome. Like, I love it. It doesn't make me feel so comfortable. It's not comforting. So, but that's okay to me. So yeah, organism, decision, mind, if you will. So where does the organism make a decision? They make it in their mind.
Right up there with choice, right?
Thank you. Brad's referring back to a wonderful talk that we gave at ABAI, where we introduced the concept of choice. It was the theme of the ABAI 2 years ago, and I was the initial speaker to talk about what does choice mean, and that's at the core of our philosophy. Is there is no choice, right? What is choice? It's the study of schedules of reinforcement.
Matching law.
So it's matching law. It's the description. Matching law just describes behavior, right? So it's that in a nutshell, and it just goes and goes and goes. And so we talked about it from all sorts of different levels. And you have this colloquial discussion, the everyday discussion of choice, and that's fine. You want to have that, but the evidence to support what we typically talk about in the everyday world is not there. So we just we pretend when we're around others, and when we're around behavior analysts, we get strict and don't talk about it. So it was a mentalist approach until Watson came along and said only behavior is observed as behavior, and then Skinner's like, nah, dude, life's radical, man. Who's writing this? Lindsay Brilliant, right? Talking about selectionism and its importance in private and public events. So you got to get Spicoli in there with Skinner, and you got it. So no, you're good. If you don't know Spicoli, go watch that movie. It's wonderful. Basically Skinner just said, don't forget about private events. But other than that, they're largely the same. And Skinner, of course, Watson wasn't working with operant conditioning. He was only working with classical. So there's a difference between those two. Skinner was like, it's all operant, mostly operant, and there's the combination. Skinner was also very much a non-blank slate guy. People screw up Skinner being blank slate. He wasn't. He was phylogenetic and ontogenic, right? So you bring, as an organism, you bring your genetics to the table, and you can't escape that. The only way you're going to get me to palm a basketball is if you make the basketball smaller. Genetically, I'm limited. I can't palm a basketball. It's not going to happen. You make the basketball smaller all day long. So we are limited by our genetics, the phylogenetic stuff. So, and if there's any paper that you read at the end result of today's discussion, read phylogeny versus ontogeny. Read it 2 times, 3 times, 37 times. I don't care how many times you got to read it, because I've read it 100 and I'll read it 150 more before I'm dead. It is an amazing paper. And if everybody understood Skinner from that perspective, and let me know if you need a copy, just hit me up in the DMs. I've got copies of it. If you can't find it, I'll just get you a PDF. So, I'll put it in here. Phylogeny versus ontogeny. So where does selection, Mr. Hand, where does selectionism come from? Great question.
You're saying the biology and the and I was like, well, that adds cultural. So how does that come into play?
Yeah, you got all three, right? So the cultural one is the one that's hard to see. That one, if you want to dig into Sigrid Glenn's work on meta contingencies, the understanding how culture changes through selection, that's great. She's kind of the leader in that. So I'll write that down. Sigrid Glenn and meta contingencies. So Sigrid Glenn talks about meta contingencies. So Skinner, this was where Skinner went beyond his data. Okay, so Skinner was not immune to going beyond his data. Skinner had tons of data for natural selection. We all do. That's Darwin and everything that's happened since. So you got Darwin. That's the species level selection. Then we're gonna put that up here, species, and then we're gonna talk about individual level selection, right? So you have individual level selection, which is behavior change in your lifetime, what you experience, what you learn. That's ontogeny, right? So the stuff that comes from Darwin was phylogeny. Your phylogeny comes up, your genetics come through, right? And then you are shaped by the world in which you live. So that's ontogenic selection, right? So then Skinner went through and said, wait a minute, this probably means there's another one. And he called it cultural level selection. So we're in between the two. So if we're going in terms of slow, so species level selection, super slow, all right? Cultural level selection, faster, but happens within your lifetime. Cultures will change. And then individual level selection happens every day. So individual level selection is what we often call learning. That's just what you experience. It's your ontogeny. All right. So then phylogeny, or the cultural level selections, how does all this change, right? So, well, you can see it if you start to travel around a lot. Different cultures have different. Let me ask Patrick, what's sweet tea to you, sir?
Well, in the South, it's iced tea with more sugar in it. I grew up in Kansas, and it's iced tea.
It's iced tea.
It's the same thing, but not as much sugar. And
right. If you try to switch that around, you do the wrong thing in the wrong environment. You don't go down south and introduce iced tea and call it sweet tea. That's
no.
You'll get punished. Well, that's a cultural level. That's a meta contingency at work, right? Everybody is following similar contingency and they're shaping your behavior, and then the contingencies play off of each other and they continue to support each other, and that develops your cultural level selection, right? So pop and soda is another good example of that. Different things like I lived in Afghanistan for 3 years, almost 5 years, I guess. But there's drastically different cultural differences there, but people are basically the same. You go through the same experiences. You're working to raise your children and do all these things, but how that plays out culturally is drastically different. Shopping cart, buggy, you bet, exactly. All of those things. tea with milk and cardamom. Oh, ooh, that's the only way I like tea. And to this day, I got cardamom pods upstairs, so I can make my black tea with cardamom. And no, I love it. I don't like regular old tea, but that's whoever said that. Thank you. I love that. Wow. Talk about some classical conditioning happening. Holy cow. I can even feel it. Like I'm getting happy, and like my face is probably responding accordingly, because there's some really good memories of learning about tea in Africa. So anyway, yeah. So all that cultural level stuff is there. So you can read about meta contingencies if you want to know more. Selection is that to me, the selection thing is kind of what fit our science in with the rest of the sciences. When Skinner stumbled upon the thought and the connection between individual level selection and species level selection, that to me is an example of consilience. When one science blends with another science, they call that consilience, right? So when consilience happens, you're probably on something really good. You're probably getting close to a law, because now you're seeing the same observations across disparate fields in drastically different sciences, and they're coming to the same conclusions. It seems to be that selection is the type of thing that, if there's anything, if you're a believer in God, if there's anything that God created, it was the process of selection, right? And why do they say that? Because you see it all over the entire universe. So what works sticks, what doesn't goes away, you know? So it's just this constant process. So that seems to be the underlying theme, at least from my perspective, across all sciences, is selection as a whole. So when we've connected behavior into that to me is that's what opened up the world of behavior to all of us as behavior analysts. Is boom, it's selected for it. Well, shit, if behavior's selected for it, then wow, what can't we do? You know, that's nothing. Like whatever we're physically limited to, whatever our phylogeny stops us at. Sorry. So to go with ontogeny more than phylogeny, I don't think you can separate the two. I think if suddenly you go into a culture and you've cut off everyone's arms, now you have a phylogenic issue, right? Or people are suddenly born without arms in a whole culture, then their behavior will develop accordingly. So you can't, to me, you can't separate them at all. They're lockstep in tight. You can't change it. What you're phylogenically prepared to do is what you'll be allowed to do ontogenically, right? So you can't. To me, you can't have one without the other. Another way of saying it is, you are a biological organism, and you can't supersede your biology. Have a good day. So it's just you just are what you are. So, and this ties that specific point ties back into practice.
Sorry,
Patrick,
Yeah.
go ahead.
even the individual versus the group, all those individual things have helped the group, because the cultural thing can also be a group. You know, teacher, our field, you know, I mean, there's so many contingencies around us. I wish I had this talk this time last year, because I didn't understand at all what it was in the class. But I mean, right now, COVID, I mean, there's so many individual things going on. Obviously, there'll probably be some phylogeny going on eventually, but there's definitely cultural aspects. You know, the masks and the social distancing and
huge cultural level. Yeah. And this starts to tie. Eventually, you're going to link all this stuff to rule following behavior, rule governed for the test. So you're going to link all this to rule governed behavior. What's rule governed behavior? Our flipping constitution. So you want to line your behavior up with our constitution, you're going to get effects like what we see in this country with the hyper individualism, and not understanding that taking care of following this one little thing might take care of all of us, which makes it better for everybody. That's not something our culture is good at. We're just not. I mean, congratulations, we hit 200,000 deaths today. Yay. Now, is that bad? No, on the grand scheme, that's not that many people, right? But that's still a lot of people, and no one else had this sort of experience. Cultural, right? It's not bad. It's not wrong. It is what it is.
We've always been, Lindsay. We love to fight.
Yeah. And this will affect real government. Yeah, exactly. So all of these things have an interplay with each other. So, yeah. So to me, rule following behavior is very closely tied in with culture. And they, I don't know, and what a culture values, right? So and then that starts to get you into motivation, right? So what are your CMOs? And every culture is different, all right? So how did those develop? Well, CMOs are just classical conditioning, right? They just develop the classical conditioning. So you do all these pairings and you develop these things. So like, wow, like to me, it's just amazing. Like, and I think I used to draw. I used to do a thing in class. I have a whiteboard, and I would I would draw contingencies for all the behaviors that people are currently operating under. You can't tease apart every contingency that you're operating under right now. It's impossible. The textbooks present them as one, then the other, then the other, then the other, then the other. And it's this nice chain. It's not. They're stacked up on top of each other, and they're happening concurrently. They're happening absolutely concurrently at all times. So your world is tough to navigate. It's a brutal one. There's so many
If anything, we end up just pulling out the strongest ones out of the mess.
And you manipulate them. Yeah, exactly. And then you try to work with them.
I do want to say something about CMOs, especially CMOR.
Yeah.
Because,
as I shrink down because I hate this topic. No, anyway, it's all good.
Well, I do too, because everybody says that CMOR is like worsening. And the thing is that it's not. It's improving or worsening.
Thank you. Thank you. Do you know where it came from? That
argument with that, because
no, you're right.
Everyone just associates it with that, and it's not. It's not. And I just don't know how else to explain that. I mean, as an art teacher, that's like my go-to subject of making sure they understand that. Mm-hmm. But then when I'm, attending all these study resources, study groups for, the BCBA exam, I only see, it's only worsening. And I'm like, no, it's not.
Here's why. In number 2,
it says worsening only.
In number 3, they say both.
Interesting.
So if somebody wants to argue with you, throw both books at them. Here's this one, because this is where you got the idea from, and throw that one at them, because this is where you can fix your idea. So, seriously.
So you wouldn't say there's a clear answer?
What's that?
You wouldn't say there's a clear answer?
Oh, I think the crystal clear answer is you're 100% right.
Okay. Cool.
It is a worsening or an improvement. It's
it would be,
a condition. Go ahead, Brad.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to make something reflexive and it only goes one way.
Right. Wait. Okay.
It doesn't make sense. It's reflexive has to go both the right. But anyway, whatever.
I brought it up. It was so funny. I brought it up with a student recently, and I remembered it, and I was like, "Oh man, I swear it goes both ways."
Amanda, maybe. They'll only give. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Brad. I didn't mean to cut you off. I was answering Amanda here. Part 2 has worsening only. Amanda, they will only give you examples of worsening. They won't give you examples of improving. For the 5th edition, you'll get both. So for the 5th task list, but you're not on that, so don't worry. So the example will be worsening. They won't say they won't question you about if it goes both directions, but the example won't be an improvement. Well, I don't know. It depends on what about Taco Bell you're talking about. If I see that there's Taco Bell food on my plate at home when I get home, it might be a CMOR. Like, it's going to be a bad night, but I am hungry.
That's the problem with delayed punishers.
Yes, exactly. The true story is I love Taco Bell, so I'd be like, hey, this is great. Life's going to be good, but there is a certain worsening effect that will happen later on down the road. So, yes, it all depends. And it's learning history. It's your own history. It's not Taco Bell isn't great for everybody. It's not bad for everybody. My kids love it. Like, give me Taco Bell. I'm like, no. So yeah, it's different for everybody, and you could have these things happening concurrently. Life gets complex. Even a single stimulus in certain contexts, the same stimulus in one context could mean something different in a different context. This is like a conditional discrimination, if you will. Seeing my dad in a certain context will make me very happy. Seeing my dad in a different context will mean that life's about ready to get really shitty. So there's more than, so it's not as clear cut as what we like to make it out in the books. It's just not. There's a lot of messy out there. So. Client needs, am I right? Let's see. Thank you, everyone. Ryan, I have one more client. Oh my gosh. Thank you, Amanda. Multiple probe design. Hit us up. Just send us an email. Post the question in the group, and we'll do our best to come up with some answers for you. Okay? Tag somebody. So, there you are. You're waving. All right. Bye. So I think Brad, one of the things I wanted to make sure that Brad got a chance was to talk about the link between the philosophy and the practice. because sometimes I don't think it's emphasized enough that these two do interplay. So I wanted to give Brad a few minutes at least to talk a little bit about that without me cutting him off.
It's all good. It's not as lengthy because you have all the articles and the history of teaching it, so it's just fluent for you. And I'm over here like, I've observed that. But Ryan and I've had several discussions. I think it's just being in the field for a bit. One of the biggest pieces I've seen that's so important about learning the rest of these philosophy pieces is, I think traditionally as kind of a field, we study and we call ourselves radical behaviorists, but we're not. I think a lot of programs and the way we approach skill development and just kind of everything we're tasked with is very mechanical and Watsonian, which turns into a board-certified behavior asshole. So it's really important to make sure that we have to recognize those private events. It doesn't mean you believe them necessarily, but you try to give the opportunity. For instance, I have one client, we've raised his skills to the point of now we're having a conversation about what he wants to do next. And so when he's at baseline, when he's doing really good, we have this great peace and great conversation. When he's frustrated, he doesn't want to do it anymore. I mean, when I'm tired, I don't want to work anymore either. So I completely get it. But it's giving that opportunity to be like, dude, what do you want to do? And what is your skill set going to tell me from what you learn? You get all into that. But no, I think whoever just posted, I think you're exactly right. I think we're drifting into ACT because we've gotten to this point where the book has stopped to some degree. So now we're into this debate of, well, what's next? We understand we're supposed to go search for private events and make something out of them, but we're not exactly getting great answers out of it either. I'm personally trying to get better about diving into ACT, but there's some things where I'm like, I don't know. I want to, if we're going to make a leap, let's make a successful leap and not just come up with stuff. Anyway.
Pretty patterns on a page. Yeah. We just got to make sure we stick with our roots as a philosophy, make sure that we're still empirical. Now you can drop it. Here's where I start to contradict myself. I'm very Machian. Keep your parsimony stuff. I'm very Machian. Skinner was heavily influenced by Mach. Now Mach's argument was no hypotheticals at all. Like, don't even propose them. But you know what? You can go ahead and propose them as long as you can figure out a way to test for them and allow for, and I think somebody, Shruti, it might have been you that said it, will the technology catch up to where we can test for some of this stuff? And I believe so. Mach argued against atomism. He didn't believe that an atom existed, not because he didn't personally believe it, but because there wasn't evidence to support it. It was a guess. It was a hypothetical at the time. So then it ended up being right, but he was anti. He hated that. So he got a bad rap for it. But his whole point was, you don't have evidence for it. And somebody said, but I will. I will invent the machine that allows you to see it.
And then I will split it, and everyone will believe it.
Yeah, boom. Right? Because humans are good.
Found one. No.
Anyway. And child practice, I think that's awesome. I think it's all about, I think that's where behavior analysts has historically had a bad rap, where we've been pigeonholed to say that we create these things and force other people into our worldview, and that's not what Skinner had in mind. That wasn't what he was in mind.
And we control and
that wasn't what he
contrive, and we fix the environment.
Yeah. If you're doing that, you're missing the whole point of Walden too. And for anybody that thinks that Skinner was rigid, cold, controlling individual, read Walden too. It's a story. It's not a science book. It's a story about what the world could be like if we all understood how to work with behavior. So, and which would lead to child-led practice. Where's your kid go? I'm all for naturalistic. Like, I found out today that my 11-year-old will work his ass off so he can mow the lawn. Okay, like I'm going to enjoy this for the next 3 years, because in 3 years he's not going to want to. But right now we're going to be like, if you want to mow the lawn, you got to clean your room. So yeah, child-led. Let them take you where they need to go, and then of course you're the manager.
Nice, Lindsay. Exactly.
Yeah, and they have and the parents we're really behavior analysts. Behavior analysts are just a special form of parent. They're an allo parent, if you will. You're a hired parent. You're not a biological parent with those kids. But really, what you're doing is parenting. You're getting them to adapt to the world that they live in, and hopefully you're changing the world to adapt to them too. Damn it, because that's something that we owe our kids.
Private events are somewhat, I mean, not as mainstream. I believe what you said. We're more. This is what I observed. This is what the data says, and this is what we're going to do in place. But I do think in some areas, in some circles, we talk so much about the study events. Did he sleep last night? Is he? Where was he at home? What is he going through? The whole trauma-based thing that we're really pushing down here in Southwest Arkansas. And once we start to dig into those deep issues, you could see more things coming out. But then on the natural side, PRT is the coolest thing, but there's more to what we do than that also. And I like the child-led stuff. You learn more because there's so many natural reinforcers.
Oh yeah. Yeah, if you're not open to all of that stuff, I think you're not being yourself a good behavior analyst. And I could argue with some old school folks about, I think a lot of old school folks get a little rigid in terms of their interpretation of what some of the new stuff is, what's happening in the new world, if you will. But I haven't seen anything out today that Jack Michael would disagree with. Maybe some philosophy issues on RFT and things like that. But in terms of the practice that we're doing and the work that we're doing, being sensitive to the needs of the client, Skinner is not rolling in his grave. Skinner's cheering. Good job, people. You're being humanists. You're not trying to put people into my little rat box. You're understanding that what I learned in the rat box and the pigeon box and the Skinner box, whatever I'll call it, you're understanding that has application in the world and that there's a core science here, but you're a humanist first. So yeah. It's a big gray area out there. You can, and you can do this stuff, and that's where ethics should come into play. This is the scary thing about being a good behavior analyst is you walk a line between very unethical all the time. The moment you have the ability to control contingencies, historically, that's a very powerful skill set to have. That's something that's been reserved for presidents, despots, rulers, those, and they can do damage. So you just have to be cautious. So yeah, always, and that's why I love the client-centered stuff. I think there's limits to what some of the things that are going on out there today. But if you just think of it like you guys are thinking of it now, I think that's the right approach. I think it's healthy, and it changes the science. It changes the discussion about how we have these conversations.
It reminds me of we were talking about your classic extinction needs to be paired with a DR of some kind. And in practice, we don't realize how close those are together and how small they can be. On paper, it's like you do A, you get extinction, but if you do B, you get reinforcement. And really, it's like this. Well, if I can get you to say something out of half of it, you're not going to go full-blown extinction burst on me, and we'll shape you out of the problem behavior later. And we'll avoid aggression, and we'll avoid hours of wasted treatment time because you're pissed. Like not having exceedingly clear and hard lines in that regard has been a very interesting and very powerful change in our approach, I think.
Sure. And remembering that you're actually doing a lot of punishing even when you don't think you are.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's we never punish children every way. Well, he started acting out, so we cleared all the toys so he would be less stimulated. It's like, wrong. Contingently, you just punished him.
But it's not in the treatment plan, so it doesn't count.
That's unethical.
Anyway.
Sorry.
We're way over time, but as you can see, we like to talk about this stuff. So
I saw one in Chicago, and it blew me in a way, and it was amazing. And I've had several clients where I wish I went that route because the problem behaviors are the type of one where I had a staff member with a broken femur. So we're talking aggression. And the one in Chicago was between smelling salts, a loud sound, a bright noise, a bright light. It's getting late. If you're seeing a bright noise, we're having a bad time.
Or a good one.
And there was another, but it was traditionally, it was done just like a reinforcer assessment, just the opposite direction. So you're looking for that decrease after it's delivered, and they did it in a multiple kind of design. It was fascinating. But anyway, super ethical too. The individual was doing severe eye gouging and starting to go blind. And regardless of skill building and regardless of any reinforcers they could possibly think of, it just wasn't doing anything. So anyway.
Go pay attention to little ones, Shruti. We have a lot of those around our lives.
Well, guys, we got some virtual learning drama going on next door, so we're gonna have to call it a night. And stuff is like for the birds. I swear, it's so much, and unless you're just, you have that personality and that focus that drive, I don't see a lot of these school age kids really having that. So it's just that's a lot of stuff for a kid to independently get his stuff done between all that.
Yeah.
I get to work from home, and my 11-year-old sits right next to me all day long, and we do virtual work all day long. So I'm lucky to be able to be there, but it's tough.
Well, guys, I really appreciate y'all. Hopefully, we can have you again sometime.
Yeah, why not?
It's been fun. It's been a blast.
We love this stuff.
Yeah, it's good for us.
We kind of do this for
conversations compared to your videos. I'm like, we got pretty deep last couple weeks.
We have the videos are about get the concept out, get them to where people can understand them, and help you pass the test. And
yeah,
conversation helps you take it to another level.
We've gotten into doozies just trying to make the woman in videos.
Right about the teaching part. I mean, when you teach it and you apply it, that's been the biggest part of my journey. Is when I got the Cooper 3rd edition, it was okay. Is there anybody like me that wants to study it? And let's dive in together. Then when I started talking about it, even I had no clue. It really it forced me into it and forced me talking. Because I taught 3rd grade, there was stuff that I was like, oh man. And then I had to study, prepare, and then I got better as I taught it. But the same thing with behavior. It's like anything else to teach. You apply it and you find those examples and really kind of tie it in. It starts making more sense. It really does.
Yep. You start getting shaped by the world.
But I can't thank y'all guys enough, and hopefully we'll see each other soon. And have fun.
Happy anniversary, Lindsay.
And happy birthday, and see everybody later, guys. Thank y'all so much.
All right.
Yeah. Have a good one.
See y'all. Take care.